Okay, guys. I'm sorry that the video didn't work. I'm going to try to make this work and record the video, and then I'll and post on Google Classroom, which is how you should be watching it. Okay, so we were. If you haven't already, if you're watching this video and you weren't in the Zoom, you need to get out your the FRQ. You can get that on Google Classroom. Maybe open that up in another screen that I posted the other day. The money market FRQs. We're going to do number 1 and 2, and we'll do number 3 later on. But let me try to work this out, and then please write down any questions and maybe put that in the comments in Google Classroom, and then I can go back and answer those questions as y'all have them for each one. Sorry that the Zoom didn't work. Hopefully I'm getting that rectified. I'm upgrading my internet. Hopefully that'll happen next week. Okay, so number 1 says, assume that Australia and New Zealand are trading partners. Australia's economy is currently in a recession. Okay, it doesn't tell us what New Zealand is, but we know that Australia is in a recession. Now assume that Australia begins to recover from its recession, which means that their AD is moving to the right a little bit. Aggregate demand. Using a correctly labeled graph of the aggregate demand, aggregate supply for New Zealand show the impact of Australia's rising income on each of the following in the short run. Okay, so I drew the graph here for New Zealand. This is what I was doing in class when we were, or in the meeting whenever we left off. And so what we have here is we have our price level. We don't know if New Zealand's in a recession or full employment or whatever, so I just drew them in full employment. Actually, you could get this right because it doesn't tell you to draw the long run aggregate supply. You could get this right and not draw the long run aggregate supply, but I just did out of habit, okay? And so this is my full employment here. Okay, so now it says that I need to show the impact of Australia's rising income on each of the following, the aggregate demand in New Zealand. So it tells me that Australia is getting out of the recession, which means they are moving to their aggregate demand's moving to the right. And so to me, that means that they're going to be buying more and more goods from New Zealand because they are trading partners, okay? So that means that the aggregate demand is going to shift to the right for New Zealand. This is New Zealand's aggregate demand, aggregate supply graph, and so it's going to shift to the right, and we'll draw our new output and our new price level. Okay. All right. So that should be for 1A. That's what you should have there on the graph. Okay. Now it says for one it says that we need to show the impact of each of the following in the short run, and then we need to explain on 1. So on 1, we should put that aggregate demand is increasing in New Zealand because they are exporting more goods to Australia, who is getting out of a recession. Okay, so I'll zoom in on that where you can see what I wrote there. Okay, if you didn't get that, you can pause it here, but I'm going to move on. Okay, all right, number 2, it says tell what's happened to output. And so what happened to output in New Zealand, we can see it's gone from full employment and it's shifted to the right. And so we could say shifts to the right or increases. Okay, shifts to the right or increases. All right, now we need to draw, it says on part B, So we need to do part B here. It says, using a correctly labeled graph of the money market for New Zealand, show the effect of the output change in part A on the following. Okay. So with my money market graph, this is what we talked about in the notes. This is going to be my quantity of money here, my nominal interest rate, which you can just draw a cursive I, okay, and then my demand for money, and my money supply, which is vertical, because my demand for money, my money supply is going to be vertical because it doesn't have a relationship between interest rate and quantity. Okay, my demand for money is downward sloping because as the interest rate decreases, more money is going to be demanded. Okay, all right. So, and you should have got that in your notes. Now let's look at what happens to the demand for money. Okay, so if price level, if we look at our graph here that we did over here, if price level increases, okay, that means we're having inflation. Okay, if price level increases and we have inflation, that means that we need more money, right? If prices go up, we want more money because we want to buy the same amount of goods. Okay, and so that means that my demand for money is going to increase or shift to the right. Now, I'm going to put just an R here for rate because that's interest rate. I'm going to shift my demand for money to the right. Put DM2. Then I'm going to put a dot here, and it is going to be rate 2. Okay. So my interest rate is increasing. So it says on B, it says I need to explain. Okay, so let me first of all get this graph for you. I'm going to zoom into this graph. Sorry, I'm got a little ghetto setup here, but we'll make it work. Okay, we're going to make this work the best we can. Okay, so that's my rate. Okay, insurance rate increasing. I'm sorry, not interest rate increasing. Now let's look at B. Okay, let's look at B. Okay, B. I'm sorry. This is for B, but we got to explain it. Okay, so the demand for money. So it says explain. Demand for money is increasing because aggregate demand is decreasing, causing the price level to increase. Okay, so demand for money is increasing because aggregate demand is increasing, causing the price level to increase in New Zealand. Okay, you can probably add on here, and so therefore they need more money. Okay, to meet the rising price level. Okay, they need more money to meet the rising price level. Okay, now for B2, it says what's happening to the nominal interest rate. Okay, so this is I. This is 2 I's there. Okay, so what's happening to our nominal interest rate? Well, if we look here, okay, our nominal interest rate is increasing. So that's all we have to put. Nominal interest rate in, I'm going to abbreviate, New Zealand is increasing. Okay, so that's kind of what's happening there. Now, we're going to skip C. We can't do that one yet. Okay, so we're going to skip C. And we're going to move on to letter D. Okay, we can do that. So all right, so 1D. Okay, 1D says, although recovering, Australia remains in recession and its government takes no action. Indicate whether each of the following curves will shift to the left, shift to the right, or remain unchanged in Australia. Okay, so let's go ahead and just draw this out. I don't think that we're going to Okay, so it says, although it doesn't tell us we have to draw it, but let's go ahead and draw this out, okay? Because it always helps us to be able to see it, okay? So we've got, so this is for Australia, okay? So we have our supply, our long run aggregate supply, and our short run aggregate supply. But if we remember, Australia is still in a recession. Okay, they remain in recession, so we got to draw this with the recessionary gap. Okay, so aggregate demand. See my Y at B. This will be Y1. Price level 1. Okay, so we're in a recessionary gap. We are not. Australia is still in a recession. They're not producing at full employment. Now, what it says is what's going to happen, keyword, the long run. So we can look at this and we've got I and we've got I2 there, right? Or sorry, D2 there. And so it says what is going to happen to aggregate supply. Well, first of all, we got both of these. We know that in the long run, nothing's probably going to happen to demand. Okay, in the long run, with all things remaining constant with this and government taking no action, nothing's going to happen to demand. Okay, zero. Okay, so aggregate demand will remain unchanged. Okay, so we got to figure out what's going to happen to aggregate supply. Now, so let's look at this. I'm going to draw a temporary line here of where we would be if we were in equilibrium. If Australia was in equilibrium, they were at full employment and weren't in a recession, they would be right here, right? And so their price level would be somewhere here. So their price level has decreased because they're in a recession. Okay, so with supply, we know that since they have decreased their price level because they're in this recession, then we know that, because we've already done this, that wages and resource prices are going to decrease because wages and resource prices always meet price level. Okay, so since wages and resource prices are decreasing, that means supply, you can supply more goods because wages and resource prices are decreasing. Okay, you can supply more goods, and so supply will increase or shift to the right in Australia in the long run. Okay, so this is what our graph should look like. And it doesn't say for us to explain, but we can just do, I'm actually going to just put short run aggregate supply will increase because, I'm going to go ahead and explain because I overdo things, will increase because wages and resource prices decrease with price level. Okay, so that should be the answer there. I'll zoom in a little bit if you want to pause it, and that way you can get all this. Okay, and then we'll move on to number 2. Okay, all right. So I'm going to erase the board real quick, and then we will move on to number 2. Okay, so number 2 is going to be about fractional reserve banking. Okay, and all right, so number 2, we have Tierra Bank, and it says that this is a simplified balance sheet here for Tierra Bank. Okay, so if we look at this, liabilities are always going to be on the right, and assets are always going to be on the left, when we're talking about, oh, y'all can see my wedding picture in there. Let's zoom that down. Let's zoom that. Yeah. Okay. Assets are always going to be on the left. Okay. Now, if we look and see, we break this down, there's $100,000 in demand deposits on this chart here. Okay. And so $100,000 in demand deposits, that means that's a liability for the bank, because that means that those are the amount of money that people have deposited in the bank, probably in checking accounts, that can easily be go in and they can get that out, that people can go in and get that money out. So that's a liability. Now, if we remember from the notes, there's two types of reserves that we have. We have excess reserves and we have required reserves. Required reserves is the amount by law that the bank has to keep in reserve and not allowed to loan out. Okay, they're not allowed to loan that money out. They have to keep that in reserve. Okay, excess reserves they can loan out. Okay, those are loans that they should be getting back from whoever they loaned it out to, along with an interest rate, which is how banks make money. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so let's look at this. It says with letter A, we've got to figure out what is the reserve requirement. Okay, well, that's really easy to figure out. Our demand deposits are $100,000 and our reserve requirement is $10,000. So I'm not super smart, but if I put, what is it, $10,000 and $100,000, I'm going to mark out these zeros because they all match up, and I'm going to get 1/10. I know 1/10 is 10%. Okay, so I'm going to put 10% here. Okay, so my answer for that is 10%. That's all you have to do. You look at the reserve requirement and you put that over the amount of demand deposits, and you get your you can figure out the reserve required ratio. We usually put it in a percentage. Okay, so you got to figure this out, you do required reserve over demand deposits. Okay, all right, let's look at B. Okay, so for B, we have a BI, a 2 I's and 3 I's. Okay, so let's look at this. It says assume Luis, okay, our boy Luis has withdrawn $5,000 in cash from his checking account from Me Tierra Bank. Okay, by how much will Me Tierra's bank reserves change based on Luis's withdrawal? Okay, so this may sound like really difficult, but if he takes $5,000 out of the bank, that means that the reserves decrease by $5,000. It's not a trick question. Okay, so if he takes $5,000 out of the bank, their reserves are going to change $5,000. So the way I kind of think about reserves is how much does the bank have on hand? How much do they have in the safe, if we want to think about it that way? How much do they have there? That's how we can think about how much, what the reserves are. It's kind of like what's in the safe, how much they have on hand that they can give out. Okay, now, so $5,000. He makes a $5,000 withdrawal. That means that the reserves are going to change by $5,000. Okay, so it says, what is the initial effect of the withdrawal on M1 measure of money, the money supply? Explain. So we talked about M1 on the notes. Hopefully you watched those. And M1 is going to include checking accounts and cash. Okay, currency. Okay, so coins, your dollars, whatever. Okay, so M1 has the most liquidity, and what liquidity means is it can be spent the easiest. Okay, and so we have that. Okay, so if he takes $5,000 out of his checking account, which it said checking account on there, if you look at B, it says assume Luis draws $5,000 from his checking account. It goes from his checking account into cash. So there's no change. Okay, it is moving from his checking account to cash, so it's still M1 money. Okay, it's classified as M1. So no change in M1 money because it says explain, so we're going to do a because Luis took money out of his checking account and now has cash. We'll put, and now has $5,000 cash. Okay. All right. So he now has there's no change. Now, if this problem would have said, assume Luis draws $5,000 in cash from his savings account, we would have a change in M1 because savings accounts are M2 money. Okay, they're M2 money, and so we would have a change there. It would have changed by $5,000, right? Because now instead of having that M1 money, that money being classified as M2 money, it's now classified as M1 because it's turned from a savings account to cash. Okay. All right. Now, number 3. Now, this is the one that students usually get confused on, and I'm going to explain it. If you have any questions, leave a message in the comments on Classroom, and I'll try to explain it. So it says, as a result of the withdrawal, what is the new value of the excess reserves on the balance sheet of Metiera based on the reserve requirement from Part A? Okay, so let's redraw the T account. Okay, so here I have my assets, here I have my liabilities, I have my required reserve, I have my excess reserves, I have my demand deposits. Okay, so Mr. Luis, he took out $5,000. Okay, so we know that he took out $5,000 in demand deposits. So that is going to be now if I do 100,000, there was 100,000 in demand deposits. We subtract 5,000 from that, and that's 95,000. Last I checked. Okay, so our demand deposits are now 95,000. So now I need to figure out, in order to figure out the required reserve ratio, if we go up to A and look, our required reserve ratio is 10%, right? So what's 10% of 95,000? Well, it is going to be 9,500. Okay, 9,500. Okay, so that's my required reserve. Now, here's what I need to figure out. I need to figure out before how much I had in excess reserves and the required reserve. Okay, so before, how much should I have? Well, I had $15,000 before. So if I look at my sheet of paper here, I see that I had $15,000 in my required reserve, right? Because my over here on my sheet of paper here, it says that we have $10,000 and $5,000. So that's $15,000. Now, if I subtract 5,000 from this, I get 10,000. Okay. So now I know that in my reserves, in the safe, at the bank, how much money they have, I only have, let me look real quick. I only have $10,000. Well, if 9,500 of that, or 9,500 of that has to go to required reserve, then the excess reserves is what's going to be left over after the required reserves. And that's going to be, so if I do 10,000 minus 9,500, I'm going to get 500. And that left over is what's going to be excess reserves. And so that's my answer to 3 is $500. Okay. All right. Now, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop those in the comments on Classroom, and I'll try to answer those. Thanks for hanging out with me and getting these answers. And we will not work C on number 2. We'll do that next time whenever we meet again. Y'all have a great day, and thank you.